Hey, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the first episode of The Copper and the Lawyer. My name is Dave Gibbs. I recently semi-retired from the police. So I spent 13 years as a police officer in Western Australia. Of that, 10 years as a detective. I've worked in all kinds of areas from gang crime through to organised crime, through to child abuse and things like that. And I recently left the force, but I'm now taking the opportunity to talk about kind of the law. And joining me today is the great and powerful Samir Banger. Samir, want to introduce yourself?
So, unlike Dave, I've worked on the other side. David would be the one prosecuting, or at least gathering the evidence in certain cases, where I'd be the one defending. We have to get into the irony of what people feel about what defense actually is at some point too. But I've been in the law and in and around the law for about 10 years now. One of my major areas has been criminal law, running hearings, being in trials, working in different jurisdictions from Supreme Court upwards and down. Look, I love criminal law. One of the main reasons is because it's so enjoyable. But like you, Dave, it's one of those points that we really need to talk more about it. And I think we need to get more awareness into the community.
Absolutely. So I want to start off with a few statistics, which I've noted down. You did some research. The latest statistics are from 2020. So in 2020 in Australia, there were 1,842 deaths directly as a result of drugs, i.e. from the perspective that's drug overdoses, deaths as a result of taking drugs. That gives us a rate of 7.2 per 100,000 people, which puts us kind of in the mid-table of the world, to be honest. It's not great, but it's not the worst. In 2019, the National Drug Study identified that 9 million Australians, that's 43%, who are 14 and over, had used illicit drug in the previous year. 43%. 12.7% of 16 to 24-year-olds have a substance use disorder as self-identified by them, and that's weighted heavily in favor of males versus females. From a enforcement perspective, 2020, 38.5 tons of drugs were seized coming into Australia or in Australia. That was a 45% increase on previous years. Of that, 90% of that was actually meth. What else we got here? 75% of crime, so people coming into police detention, 75% people who submitted to voluntary drug analysis that their urine contained illicit drugs, shocker. And 65% of prison entrants said that they use drugs on a regular basis, mainly being ice. Since 1971, haven't got the figures for Australia, but 1971 is kind of when the drug war officially started. The US alone has spent $1 trillion on fighting the drug war, and the cost of the war of drugs in Australia on a yearly basis is somewhere between 1.1 and 1.5 billion per year. But that is just purely to investigate specifically drugs. That's not all the other crimes which happen as a result of drugs. That's just drug investigation. And last 2020, $11.3 billion was spent by Australians on drugs. So I think it's fair to say that the war on drugs, we failed, we lost. What do you reckon?
I think that's a very conclusive answer. I don't think you can go anywhere from that. Those statistics are pretty grave, and quite frankly, repeating the same old isn't going to achieve anything. The problem is how we look at drugs partly, and the fact that just throwing money at something that's not really working is not getting us anywhere. Look, I think partly, David, it's the thinking process, really, what people think of it, how it's thought about, and still when you see it in the court system, I'm sure you're seeing it as well when you see someone sentenced on a drug matter, the magistrate or judge will give them the shellacking on how bad drugs are. And these days they turn to the cartels and what happened there and the issues, the people that might have passed away or have been hurt in the process. But we don't actually look at the issues that we're creating in our own country by enforcing this, and the money we're wasting, and the fact that the issues that you just mentioned, people are doing ODing and stuff like that on drugs that we could deal with better rather than dealing. We're probably fighting on the wrong level, so to speak.
I think the start of the conversation has to be is that there are different kinds of drugs. Not all drugs are created equal. there are different classes of drugs, and different drugs are more dangerous than others. So if you take drugs like cannabis is a good example. Now, cannabis at the moment, depending which state you're in Australia actually in, could be legal in small amounts, but in other states it's not. My personal belief, and again, this is basically in my career, I spent out of 13 years, 9 of those essentially investigating drugs. So that's literally all I did in my detective career, which is organised crime, gang crime, drug and firearm squad. I just investigated drug dealers. So that's literally all I've done. And cannabis, to be honest, I think is a complete waste of the police's time. If you look at all the research on cannabis, it is no more harmful than alcohol. Now, I'm not saying alcohol isn't harmful, but bearing that in mind, I think we need to stop wasting money as a community on actually enforcing and criminalizing people for cannabis, and just legalize it, control it, tax it, license it, follow the model that's happened overseas. And all the time you do something like that, it just frees up more policing time to actually deal with more serious drugs. I mean, what's your view on that?
So I agree with most of it. I guess the only thing I would probably start with decriminalizing it in the first place, and then work my way up. But I completely agree. I think our conclusion or the end result will be the same. Tax it, legalize it, have places you can smoke weed, your own house, for example. I probably wouldn't go as far as Canada, where I believe in certain streets you can go down walking down the street smoking cannabis, because I still hate the smell of cannabis regardless. But you know what? That's different. That's a discussion we can have later. But step by step, I would start by decriminalizing it and working towards it. Look, I think smoking is more harmful, and I actually fundamentally believe one of the reasons that they're not legalizing it or decriminalizing cannabis is it's so easy to grow yourself. Whereas if you have to purchase cigarettes and the amount of tax money they'd make on that. So that's probably one of the issues I see. But you're right. If you can't grow it yourself, for example, you have to purchase it. There is tax paid on it. It's a start. It's a segue into it, and you wouldn't be wasting those resources. And the other thing to point out is, in a lot of states, there's a cannabis caution system anyway, where the police officer actually has the ability to caution you. And I'm sure certain police officers don't even want to be doing that because, as you said, it's a waste of time. When if you look at a different drug, meth, for example, way more dangerous. And I don't think many people are going to turn around and say, look, meth is okay. So, as you said, look at the drug itself.
Yeah, look, I completely agree with the decriminalisation. I mean, I would go as far to say is that we should decriminalise all personal possession of all drugs. I mean, I guess from my experience, I don't see what benefit anybody gets, whether it's the individual themselves or society as a whole, to send somebody to court for possessing a personal amount of drugs, whether that is cannabis, heroin, meth, whatever. In some cases, you are criminalizing somebody who wasn't a criminal beforehand, and you're giving him a criminal record which is seriously going to affect his life. Certainly in Western Australia, in terms of like travel and things like that, and going overseas, employment. I don't see any benefit to do it. Now, I don't know what you have over there, but in Western Australia, we have this thing called drug court, which at the moment is still a very, very small part of the justice system, and is actually very hard to get into. But I've seen drug court work extremely well with people who are happy to plead guilty to their offence, and they will go through drug court, go through urine analysis and rehab as part of that process, and actually come out the other side now not using drugs, which ultimately is what the aim should be of any kind of like punitive measure, really, is to prevent further offending. And they've got moved away from drugs. But do you have drug court over there?
Again, very similar to you. It's a very small part. Most matters are still dealt with in the local court or the magistrate's court for other states, or the district court, which is I've forgotten what it is now, county court for certain other states. So, well, again, some territories don't have the district court to go straight to Supreme. But look, generally speaking, yes, most matters will be dealt with in the local or district. We have a drug court, very similar to the WA system. It's just not widespread enough, very difficult to get into. It's effectively a ballot, I believe, to actually get into the drug court here, which isn't exactly the best way to do it. And you'd think with matters, especially small matters, they could be dealt with that way, or even matters where there's ongoing addiction. If you can get rid of that person's addiction, you're getting rid of the underlying issue. So why wouldn't you push people towards that? So I completely agree.
It seems completely logical to expand drug court massively, and I've never understood why that doesn't happen. I don't know if it's just purely a resource issue, or I don't know. I don't see a political will in general to do anything about drugs other than appear to be acting tough on talking about drugs, but not actually dealing with the problem. So, I mean, cannabis is a classic example. So a large proportion of the cannabis in Western Australia is controlled by essentially Vietnamese organised crime. So right across Perth, you have grow houses where somebody rents a house from some poor bugger who's rents his house out. And next thing he knows, he's got 5 bedrooms of cannabis plants and his house destroyed. And, you know, all that money at the moment is just going offshore into organised crime. And there is no benefit to the community whatsoever. I just think if we were to legalise cannabis, it just takes organised crime completely out of the picture and gives us actually something that, you know, there's lots of research in the cannabis. I'm not ever been a drug user, and I don't know if it was legal, would I use it? Look, I don't know. I'm old. Who cares? But like, the point is that people are using drugs every day, you know. And I don't know what you think, but I don't think the fact that drugs are illegal has ever stopped anybody using drugs who wanted to use drugs. I didn't go, oh no, I would have done that, but it's illegal.
Let me tell you this. Actually, let me tell you a step further. Lawyers use drugs. Doctors use drugs.
Yep.
In fact, doctors, the medical profession uses drugs a lot.
Yep.
Police use drugs.
Yep.
The army use drugs. Okay, this is very generalized, not everyone does. But the point is, in these industries, people use drugs. Truck drivers are not the only ones who use drugs, yet everyone seems to know truck drivers use drugs to stay awake during their hardcore shifts. But everyone does it. I have had people come to me, clients who are doctors, clients who are lawyers. I know of people who have been in the military and have been caught but then let go. But if people have this misconception or misguided view that it's only a very small section of society and it's only the poorer sections of society that use drugs, you are completely incorrect. I can tell you I've been personally at parties with other people of the similar profession to mine, say a doctor party, medicine, I'm going to call it a doctor party, where drugs have been openly used, such as cocaine and a bunch of other drugs. I'm like you, Dave. I haven't used it. I wouldn't use it even if it's legalized. However, the way it's done is completely wrong. And people need to see that there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. Don't just don't just read the front page of the paper and think it's only a certain section of the community that takes it. There's a section that gets caught or a section that's more likely to get caught. However, more sophisticated individuals don't necessarily get caught, or it's very rare for them to get caught, but they're still using.
And I think people don't realize as well that the entire drug market has changed completely in the last 10 years with the introduction of like the internet. But so I went to a presentation, I think in 2013 from the AFP talking about the dark web. And I was like blown away by, you know, they started talking about Bitcoins and stuff. I should have bought some of them back then, but anyway. And I ended up working in the Western Australian Police. They had this thing called the meth transport team, where they started looking at drugs coming into Western Australia other than through the traditional methods of like the drug dealer around the corner. And what we discovered was just the amount of drugs coming through the postal system is absolutely off the scale. There's so many drugs coming through the postal system because there's just so much post. It is literally impossible to stop it all. And the difference here is that Joe Schmo is now not going to the hairy bloke at the corner to buy his drugs. He's jumping onto the dark web and he's finding whatever he wants from wherever he wants and ordering it directly, and it's coming to his house. So the drug market has actually changed. And what we found when we came to looking up some of these people, that these people did not in any way, shape or frame fit the idea of the stereotype of a drug dealer at all. You know, we had some really quite young guys who were honest students, really, really intelligent kids who were ordering hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ecstasy tablets on the dark web and making a lot of money. But they're not your traditional idea of a criminal, and it wasn't the same. You're absolutely right. It's not that social class or the underclass everyone thinks of. Yes, right at the bottom, the people who are habitually using meth on a daily basis, you know, it's pretty hard to maintain a good standard of life when you're in that situation. But drug use, 43%, 9 million people, 14 and over, are using drugs. So, the horse has kind of gone out the stable door and is run down the road. It's too late. It's gone. It's happening in society. And really now, there's a whole other discussion to have. Is why do people use drugs in the first place? Well, that's an even bigger discussion. But at the moment, people are using drugs, and it's not like they're going to stop anytime soon because they're illegal. So I don't know. I would just rather we had some control and take organized crime out of it, because at the moment, the people who are making literally millions and millions and millions of dollars out of the drug trade in Australia, they're not in Australia. They're overseas somewhere. They're in Dubai. They're in Thailand. They're in Vietnam. They're certainly not in Australia, and they're not the ones who are getting caught anyway. You look at these massive drug hauls that have been made, makes big news, and it's great. Everyone stands there with big bags of drugs, haven't done a great job. It's normally the minion at the bottom who ends up going to prison for 20 years, which is, fair enough, no worries. But we're not stopping the drugs coming in. And I'll give you a classic example. I was involved in a big drug seizure, where we are, year before last. I think it was 186 kilos of meth coming to Western Australia via the road. So that was, I think, at the time, pretty much one of the biggest seizures ever, and one of the biggest ever sort of road seizure. Now, after that seizure, tell you what didn't happen. We didn't run out of meth in WA. Okay? There was no shortage. There was no people on the street going, "Where's my meth?" And the price didn't go up. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the supply is such a level that even a seizure of that size is making no difference. So we have to figure out how to kind of do things better and differently.
Look, and you've raised a very interesting point there with that seizure. What's happened afterwards, the practical effect or the practical impact of that seizure was next to nothing. People are still getting their drugs. And it's very odd that we keep targeting the same people. And as you said, Dave, spot on. And people need to realize this: the minions, the runners, they might be lower middle level. Let's give them that at top.
Yep.
You are not getting the upper echelon. They're usually protected, and most of these people won't rat them out anyway because there's other consequences for them.
Yep.
You stop that, or you deal with that issue, and the drug issue will start to disappear, or at least slow down, or at least get to a lower level. But the way it's working now is completely redundant. It might have been the way that we looked at it 50, 60 years ago. It's purely punitive. There is very little emphasis on rehabilitation. Don't get me wrong, we've moved there over the last 10 to 20 years, but we haven't gone far enough that way. And as you've pointed out, if we've looked at it on that level instead, you might deal with the drug issue. And as you've also raised, why are people using drugs? If we don't look at that in the first place, how the hell are we ever going to stop this? You get rid of one dealer, another one will pop up.
Yep.
You get rid of one, you might get another 3 popping up. It might be like, you chop off the dragon's head and 3 more pop up. It's just going to keep happening until you stop the root cause or deal with that anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's just too much easy money to be made, as simple as that. I don't think people have an idea of how much money is swirling around in the drug trade. I mean, I've seized millions and upon millions of dollars. It's all cash. It's being shipped around Australia as we speak in backs of trucks and stuff. It's just there's so much money swirling around that it just attracts people to that world to make easy, quick money without too much effort, really. And that's not going to change until you do something to kind of take them out of the equation. Addiction in any form is sad. And like, I've dealt with so many people who are addicts of various drugs. And whatever you think of that individual, are they responsible for their situation? Well, yeah, they're the one who took the drugs. But, addiction is horrible and it is sad. And like, there is no one is a happy addict. There's no such thing as like, my life is going great. So I thought, what can I do to my life to make it better? I know I'll get on the meth pipe because that's bound to make things better. It's a catalogue of trauma and just dysfunction and unhappiness. And that's what leads people into, if it's serious drugs, we're talking about meth and heroin, no one is using those drugs because it was a lifestyle choice because, it sounded like a fun thing to do.
No, I completely agree with you. And again, it goes back to the root cause or why that person's gone into it. And this goes back to another point you've made, which is, look, spot on. It's interesting. Your view is very progressive, and I appreciate that because I think a lot of people don't understand that there's people in your position in the police who also don't like what they are enforcing. I've had magistrates say a similar thing, by the way, where they don't appreciate the drug laws anymore and they think they're a bit archaic and outdated. But when you look at someone who doesn't have a criminal history or someone that has no other issues, they're not a violent person, they're generally okay in what they're doing, but they have a serious drug problem. It might be related to their mental health or something else.
Yep.
And for example, cannabis is one of the biggest it's used for self-medication for mental health all the time by clients that I've had, and I'm sure people that you've seen as well. You now criminalize that person, give them a criminal record because they've been caught 2, 3, 4 times. They might be facing jail the next time. What good is that going to do? They're not going to go to jail, come out and go, I'm going to stop smoking cannabis. Number one, they're probably going to smoke in there anyway, because anyone that thinks there's no drugs in jail, that's a fallacy, complete fallacy. In fact, certain jails have easier access to drugs than the streets. But number two, they go in, and me and Dave have discussed this on other episodes or other podcasts, where they're probably going to learn more bad things, not good things, to use that term, and come out worse, and probably going to hate the system and hate everyone around. That is going to make them a worse criminal, and that's probably going to lead them to institutionalization, which none of us want for society.
No, exactly. And, punishing, look, I understand society has a need to punish people. I'm not saying we should do away with prisons at all. There are some people who should be in prison. It's as simple as that. But we also have to realize that at the moment, we're just imprisoning people without actually making any difference. So maybe for 6 months or 12 months, they're not committing a crime. Now, the crime they were committing was probably, using drugs anyway. Would they have not committed other crimes to do that? Possibly. So maybe that's stopping somebody from doing a burglary or breaking into a car or whatever. But when they come out, are they in any way kind of, what's the word? Have they been kind of affected by prison so that they're rehabilitated? No. There's no, if you speak to people who've been to prison, and I've spoken to a lot of people who've been in prison, there are programs available, but they are not particularly easily accessible depending on what your background is. And also, there's quite a lot of peer pressure in the prison, to not to be part of that anyway. And there's a huge opportunity for rehab, certainly in Western Australia. Rehab at the moment in Western Australia is a complete and total joke. And it is all a mixture of well-meaning, doing their best, charities and NGOs, etc., all try and do their bits and pieces and setting up private rehab, things like that. But this should be something that the government is controlling. I mean, we've just built some nice big quarantine camps in Western Australia. I mean, maybe we could use those for rehab. That'd be a good idea, wouldn't it? What would we use them for? So I don't know. I just think we have a huge opportunity. If we really want to make society a better society, then we have to accept that drug use is part of it, because that's the choice that some people have made, and that we have to understand that some people are going to make bad decisions about that. Just like some people abuse alcohol, some people who take drugs will abuse drugs, and that's to do with their personality, genetics, experience, trauma, whatever. And we as a society should want to try and get that person back to being a functioning member of society. And we as a society have to realize that isn't going to happen at all if we just lock people up and do nothing else. That's not fixing the problem. It's just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic for 6 months, really. That's it.
You know what's interesting about it? You're spot on, right? You're not fixing the problem. I think, unfortunately, some people feel better about it, and some people feel that punishment and being punitive is the only way forward. And I think it's kind of retribution nearly, because they feel that these people have committed all these crimes.
Yeah.
But I think, firstly, people need to come to an understanding about who uses drugs. That would be big, and we can work on it from there. And that is a problem that I think mainstream media have not assisted with, because really we have a pretty big middle class population who uses drugs. And out of that percentage, Dave, I'd love to actually then narrow it down and go through the professionals that use it. And like I said, I've only got my anecdotal experience. You've got your experience from being a police officer, what you've seen as well. But both of us know that it's not just segregated to one society, or it's not just one proportion of one society, proportion of society that's using it. And rather than look at it that way, if we open our eyes to the whole issue, we might be able to deal with this in a different way. But what is that going to take, I guess, is the next question.
But look, I just wonder, and I don't see it from any of the major political parties even wanting to have a discussion about it. You know, I mean, I'm not saying that tomorrow we could decriminalize all drugs and just carry on. There's lots of work to be done, but you have to start having a conversation at some point. And I just don't see, I haven't seen any politicians really kind of brave enough to actually, raise this with people, because I think the way the media has kind of educated the customers or the public, drugs bad, drug dealers worse, and it's such a nuanced problem, but people just want punishment and retribution because they've been burgled, and I understand that, but it's such a big problem that we have to find alternative ways to fix it, because it's just not, what we're doing isn't working. So it's the old saying, if you keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, is literally the definition of insanity. But that is the legal system as it relates to drugs. And all we can see is that, we've doubled how many people were arrested between 2010, 11 and 2019, 20. We doubled how many people in Australia were arrested. It went from 82,000 to 166,000, in 1 year, just purely for drug offences. So all the hard work, in that 9 years I spent working my nuts off in drug enforcement, essentially all that happened was more and more people got arrested for drug offences. So you could argue that's a good result. But if the seizures have gone up and up, but more and more people are using drugs, it just means that more drugs are coming into the country. So, and I'm not alone. I spoke the other day to a guy who's been a drug investigator for a lot of years. And we were talking about this very subject. And I said, that my view is it's time to do something different, expecting him to kind of go, what? And he was like, no, I totally agree. Yeah. So, there's a lot of us who've worked in this world have just got to the realization that, we're just working hard, having fun, because like drug investigation, as for a copper, is really exciting work. But are we really making a difference? Probably not, and like we want society to be better than that.
The jury's out on that one, as we say. Well, I like to say it's probably deliberated by now and come back and figured out that it's not working.
Yeah,
look,
exactly.
And I think there's certain, you do want to target, and if you focus just on targeting the higher echelon in the drug trade, I guess part of the problem is they're not here anyway, as you've suggested. So that's an issue. But let's just say they were here and that's who you were targeting. That's one thing. But targeting the minions and the runners and the people who possess the drug is not helping anyone. You're creating more of a problem, arguably, and I'd say is a strong argument for that. You're not dealing with the issue at all. And what you pointed out in the statistics, right, going from 82,000 arrests to 160-odd thousand, that could it be more users? Could it be the fact that the police have just cracked down on something that's not working? Or it's not, the point is, either way, the growing number of arrests means there's no improvement.
Yeah, I haven't got the figure in front of me, but from memory, something in 80% of that was basically for simple drug offences, so possession. So that's
And that's utterly ridiculous in itself, because out of those possession offences, a lot of those possession offences would have been, look, some of them may have been they've just pulled someone over, someone's just walking down the street, they're inebriated or whatever, they picked them up, smell of alcohol, realise they've got drugs on them. Why at that point charge that person? Look, unless they've caused an issue, there's a fight or something like that. There could be many reasons, but a lot of these possession offences, some of them come around festivals, some of them come, and quite a few of them come when this person's committed something that is completely out of the ballpark. Like they may have done something stupid elsewhere, or it could have been something else and completely irrelevant to the drug offense, and they've just happened to be found or searched for another reason. So the improvement and what we're actually getting out of it is still an interesting issue. Now, look, it's one that has to be discussed. I think we're going to be discussing this for a while, because I don't see the change coming anytime soon. The only political party, and I hate to say it, that I've seen speaking about this at all, or that's even raised it in any way, is probably the Greens. Unfortunately, I don't see eye to eye with them on everything else.
No.
I don't know exactly where they stand with this right now, but they're probably the only party that I can turn to that said anything, that's mentioned anything about this and tried to deal with this issue in any meaningful way.
Yeah, politicians run scared of it because it's not seen for them as being, I think, a vote winner. Because like if you look at I suppose the libs, they want to be seen as being tough on crime, and it doesn't fit with that kind of like that narrative, but there are examples around the world. Portugal now has been 20 years of decriminalized possession, and the figures are all out there for everyone to look at. It has had a tremendously positive effect on not just obviously taking the weight off the courts and things like that, but drug use. There was predictions that drug use was going through the ceiling and blah blah blah. That hasn't happened at all. Drug deaths have decreased significantly, and they are treating drug use as it should be, as a medical issue. If you're a drug addict, that's a medical problem. How you got there, well, that's a different matter entirely. But it is once you're an addict, you have a medical problem that has to be treated. Otherwise, it's not going to go away. So, there are examples, but there's very few examples of decriminalization which has been successful. But Portugal has been a shining example, and I think, look, my expectation in Australia is I think we're getting somewhere in 10 years' time at the current rate of knots, maybe cannabis might be decriminalized across Australia. That's how slow we move. But again, how can you have national drug policy with every state having completely their own set of drug laws, different things that are legal, different things that are illegal, different penalties? So do you think there should be a set of national drug laws? Is that the only way to actually achieve anything?
Look, it's probably not the only way, but it would be one of the best ways, and in fact, best ways. If you haven't heard me before, if you're new to what I say, I actually don't support state government at all. I think it's just stupid, and we don't need state government at all in Australia. So, which would lead to this as well, having federal laws on this rather than state laws. But having different laws in and amongst the states and territories does cause problems. And Dave, it's a good point. You say, for example, you can smoke cannabis in the ACT, you cross over the border into New South Wales, and now all of a sudden, bang, you've done something illegal, or you're doing something illegal. Where's the sense in that? People might turn to America and say similar things happens there, but why are we looking at a country that's not doing very well either? I don't think America is the shining light or the thing that the country we should be emulating regardless.
But you can't argue. You can't argue that drugs bad. So if cannabis is bad for your health, and that's the argument why it's illegal, then it can't be legal in one state and illegal in the other state, because your argument just falls in a heap. It's law for law's sake, really. And I've spent quite a bit of time in America before the pandemic, and it's such a different kind of culture going to different states. Obviously, it's legal in some places, illegal in others. Certainly in in LA, every third shop appears to be a weed shop these days, and the money changing hands is astronomical. I think when I was there one time, it was made legal in Nevada, so Vegas went absolutely gangbusters with that. But in some states like Texas, it's still illegal. So there is a kind of there's not a clear guideline across the whole of America. But Canada, it's all completely legal now. But I just don't see what we're achieving by having cannabis illegal. I can't. If someone could explain to me what the benefit of cannabis being illegal is, then I'm happy to listen to that argument. But what I've seen with cannabis is that, like any drug, it's when kids are exposed too young for it, that's when it causes problems. I've seen 12-year-old kids who have been smoking cannabis since they were 8 years old, who are, although you can't get chemically addicted to cannabis, they basically can't function without it. So they smoke from the moment they wake up pretty much to the moment they go to sleep every day, at 12, 13 years old. Now, that's obviously not a good thing, but that's happening now and it's illegal. So, if we were to regulate the supply, that we could actually improve that situation. Whereas at the moment, it's just coming through the black market. And then obviously cannabis can be I guarantee you, if I wanted to, I could go out and buy cannabis. I reckon I could get some under 5 minutes, in a small town where I live, because it's that easy, it's everywhere. So I would just like to see us put that to one side and move on. And then we can talk about things like party drugs. Party drugs is a classic one, if we don't think our kids are using party drugs like they're going out of fashion, well, we're kidding ourselves, to be honest, yeah, because it shocked me how much it's being used these days. I had it one of the last jobs I did before I left. Long story short, I was chatting to a young lad who'd been attacked, and I said to him, "Mate, look, you're not in trouble for this, but the AMBO is going to ask you what you've been, have you had any drugs tonight?" He goes, "Oh yeah, no, I've had MDMA and ketamine and cocaine." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." So yeah, but that's what kids do these days. They are getting their drugs sometimes through a dealer, sometimes on the dark web, and they are preloading or before they go out, because going to a pub is so expensive these days, and that's just something that is socially acceptable to them. So again, do people not do that because it's illegal? I don't know about that. So do we want our kids to have access to drugs that aren't full of rat poison and borax, which you can get from the pharmacy, or should we just keep them buying them through the black market?
See, and here's the thing, as you said, you don't know what's in there. If there's anything that's going to kill your children, it's going to be that. If you can at least control what's in there or have some guidelines around it, it changes it a little bit. And if you allow the research onto it, you'll find out a lot more about these drugs in the first place, which if it's illegal, it's unethical to test it, right? That's the other dilemma that we have. So you have that too. But look, you've also raised a very good point. Parents often don't know what their kids are doing, and that's regardless of their children's age. They assume they know, but come on, let's be real. Let's think back to when we were younger. Did you tell your parents absolutely everything? There's a small percentage of people that probably did, but most of us didn't. And there's probably a reason why you didn't. Like, I'm sure I wouldn't be telling people what I was doing when I was telling my parents, I should say, when I was 15, 16, because they'd be freaked out. And it's probably the same with other people, yourself and other people, Dave. So why now do we think our kids are going to be treating us the exact same way? My parents always used to say to me, wait till you have kids and you'll know. And I think that's the best thing they've ever said to me, because factual. You don't. You learn a lot.
Yeah. I mean, it just nothing upsets me more when you see and it always makes headlines because it's so tragic. You see some kid who's gone out and taken a couple of tablets and end up killing them. It's just a tragic waste of life. But again, it's already illegal, so they knew the risk and decided that was okay. Do we want to harm minimization is something that's talked about a lot in drugs. Do we want to minimize the risk of that of having an overdose, or purity, or it's full of crap, or these tragedies are just going to keep happening? And unfortunately, if you actually look at the figures, there's not a ton of them in Australia, but they always make headlines because, to be honest, it's normally some nice middle-class kid who goes to private school and took a tablet one day and it killed him, and it's a tragedy. But that's why it makes headlines, to be honest. I mean, people die of overdoses every day, but frankly, no one gives a shit because they're just seen as being society's kind of underbelly. But I just think we have to think of a better way than having police dogs at the entrance to festivals, that kind of stuff. And if we are going to not legalize these, then just decriminalize it, because again, you got some 17, 18-year-old with 3 eckies in their pocket. Do we want to ruin their life? Is that really is that helping anybody? Is it helping that child? Is it helping the society? No, it's not actually doing anything positive. So I would love us to be able to have this discussion about what we do next, because
completely. One thing I want to add to what you've said is, when you look at children or young adults from 18 to their early 20s, when they think about what they've previously done in their early 20s, and when they hit their 30s, say for example a few years down the track, they don't necessarily think, shit, we've done the right thing. A lot of people will say, okay, maybe that wasn't right, but now let's take a step back. You criminalize them in their 20s, they carry that. And they may not be able to be a better member of society in their 30s, which if you just let it go in the first place, maybe they would be. And again, I think it comes to how you deal with it. But just hitting them in their 20s for something that for some people is a stupid mistake, but then also going back to that private school kid, for example, that you used, let's hazard a bet that a lot of these private school kids have been using quite a bit. Then all 100%. Of a sudden, one of them just used it one day, used the wrong one, unfortunately one that was tainted, passed away, and as you said, hit the news. And they're probably painted as using it on a one-off time or the only time, because none of their friends are going to come clean saying they use it all the time, and their parents won't have any idea.
That party drug use is endemic, and certainly in that kind of like middle, sort of like middle class, sort of like private school. Yeah, 100%. It is being used, is rife right across Australia, and I don't think anything is going to change that anytime soon. I mean, the interesting thing outside of traditional illicit drugs, the drugs that actually kill more people in Australia are actually opioids, the majority of which are actually prescribed drugs. So if you look at the horrendous situations happening in America, where I think for the first time last year, over 100,000 people died of opioid overdoses. Although we're nowhere near there because of our population size, it is actually becoming a real problem in Australia, and drugs such as oxycodone and fentanyl are now being regularly found as the cause of people's deaths, and those are drugs that people are getting from the doctor. So it's not just about the drug. We think of drugs, we think of drug dealers and crooks and things like that. Prescription drugs, you could argue, are actually as big, if not a bigger problem. I've seen people, dexamphetamine, all those kind of drugs. There's a massive black market for those. People go to doctors, they get prescribed 50, they sell 20, use 30, and then go to another doctor's and get another prescription, and that's how things carried on. So, again, it comes back to, why are so many people using drugs? What is your view? Why has drug use gone through the roof?
I think several reasons. There's different reasons for different drugs. Some is peer pressure. Some is excitement to go to the next level. There's psychedelics, which people think will give them a different type of experience. For example, that's another realm of why people use it. I think sometimes it's just for something different, Dave. Like, to be honest, I think sometimes it's just for something different. But part of the other reason is when someone says don't do it, you're like, shit, let's go do it. I think a lot of people are in that position too, because you know what? Let's actually try what this is. Why are we getting told we shouldn't do it? Yeah, they tell you it's bad in school and what it does and what it may do, but that doesn't necessarily work.
Yeah,
especially with drugs like cannabis.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, maybe the criminalization of drugs actually, to a certain degree, works in their favor because it's seen as being a bit kind of like being a bit kind of being a bit risky and like take a chance, and maybe that adds to the excitement of first use because. I don't know. I think it's a generational thing. I remember when I was, as a teenager, the only drugs that was really around was a bit of cannabis around. And then I knew people that took the old style of amphetamine, the powder-based amphetamine. But there just weren't really drugs about. And there seems to be just a lot more social acceptance of drug use in general. And it makes me kind of think, what has driven that? Is it because people is life just not very fulfilling these days that we have to look towards escapism through drugs? I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just I'm an old bloke and I don't understand what the world's moved. When I was 18 years old, just go out and get blotto on alcohol. Is that the same thing as going out and getting off your head on some ecstasy tablets? Maybe it's the same thing. So maybe nothing's changed.
Both, though, Dave. A lot of people just go both. A lot of people do both. The alcohol index tablets, they both have counter effect, really. So I don't know either. And here's the thing, regardless of age, I actually don't even understand. And I know people that have used, and I often wonder why they do it too. Like, in the end, your call, do whatever you want. But it's a really difficult one to answer. I wonder, I'm sure there's been studies done on it or some opinion pieces written on it. But ultimately, how far they've dug into it's another question, because it's a good one, and because that again goes to the underlying issue, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak from my experience of working as a human source handler, talking to people who are every single one of them was a drug user, and their experience, they're using drugs because their life sucks. Basically, they've had horrible lives, horrible traumatic lives, full of just misery and dysfunction, and they are taking drugs to escape that reality. So that takes care of a certain percentage of the population. But like I said before, that isn't everybody. That's not. It'd be lovely if the problem was just 5% of people who was society's underbelly, and that was the only problem with drugs. No dramas, we can deal with that, but it isn't. If if it was 43% of people were admitting taking drugs. I mean, what's the actual figure? It has to be higher than that. So the problem is much, much deeper than just I had a terrible childhood and was abused and I've ended up on heroin. It's, you know, it's personal choice, people making a decision that they want to seek to escape the world they're currently in, you know, through drug use. And certainly kids, I have spoken to kids, and it's just what you do. You basically, you do your job or your school all week, and then Friday night you just get on the disco biscuits, and you know, that's it. That's just how you escape your week, and that's just how they live every single week. And yeah, I guess modern life isn't quite as fulfilling as it could be.
A lot of the people I've spoken about that have used drugs or use drugs regularly, they don't do it. They don't do it because they had a bad, terrible childhood. It's something else. It might be the escaping their environment,
Yeah.
the excitement it gives them, whatever it is. But I can tell you, a lot of these people have had great childhoods, great parents. So nothing like that. There's no trauma or severe trauma that they can link it to. It's purely experimental. That's gone somewhere else, or they enjoy something about it. So then if you're targeting everyone that way, you're also missing a lot of people. But again, there are people who are going to listen to this who do not believe that there are professionals or people of that caliber and those professions that use drugs. And you really need to understand they are there. And that's why it's such a complex question in the first place.
Well, drugs are endemic in our society, and their use is endemic. And I think there has to be an acceptance of that in the first place, because until you accept that it's not just the crackhead down the road who's on drugs, it's basically your next door neighbor, or it could be a teacher. You know, there was a case very recently, which is still about to go to sentencing down here, you know, of a high school teacher, you know, who was caught, you know, dealing drugs. So, you know, it happens. It's interesting. Like, if you look at Australia, drug use or types of drug use is different in different parts of the country. So, you know, New South Wales has always had high cocaine use for whatever reason, whereas in Western Australia, we are just meth crazy over here. We just love the stuff. You know, our meth use is absolutely off the charts. And what comes along with that, and this is the difference people understand about drug use, is that the person who is smoking cannabis or popping a couple of pills or even doing a line of cocaine is not going to break into your house and steal your car to buy some more. It is the people who are taking meth and, to a lesser degree, heroin, who have to find a large amount of money every day to fund their addiction. So, you know, if you're a meth addict, a point of meth, somewhere between $50 and $70 in Western Australia, you know, you might use 2 or 3 points a day. So, you know, you've got to come up with at least $1,000 a week just to kind of fund your habit. So how do we expect people like that to fund that habit? They haven't got a job. So what they're going to do, they're going to commit more crime in society. So people understand that the drug problem is not just about the person who is suffering from drug addiction. It is the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of offences that they may commit just to fund that habit. So if you deal with that problem, you also reduce the crime rate massively and the impact on people's lives. So it's a win-win-win for the whole of society. If you can get somebody who is currently a meth addict to not be a meth addict anymore, I don't know if you could work out what the cost benefit is to society, but it would be huge, because these people are committing so many offences every single day just to supply them with meth, and they ain't going to stop.
Well, you put it this way: you're not just going to stop them by saying, "Oh, you're going to go to jail if you don't stop." You need to deal with it very differently, and the jails are very limited in the programs they have for rehabilitation. There's obvious reasons for that, and quite frankly, that's not going to stop them reoffending when they get out anyway, even if you manage to stop them for a couple of months or a few months while they're in there, which generally you can't, but let's just say you actually can do that. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, okay. I mean, going back many years ago, there was a lot of public furor about like the shooting galleries and having, you know, public injection sites for heroin addicts. Obviously, King's Cross was kind of famous for that. But, you know, where do people want the heroin addicts to inject themselves? Would they prefer to do it in their front garden, or, you know, in some kind of controlled environment? it's a really hard one for society because it makes us deal with stuff that we really don't want to confront or think about until it lands on our doorstep. But there are, of those, what was it, 1,842 deaths in 2020? I would wager that probably, or at least 1,500 of those would be as a result of either heroin, opioids, fentanyl, because fentanyl's a new one now, but fentanyl, they reckon now, is just killing thousands and thousands and thousands of people in America because it's so strong compared to heroin. So, we have to remember that where did all these addicts come from in the first place? That was because they opened pain clinics in most American cities that were pumping out oxycodone like it was like Smarties, because they were incentivized to do so by the big pharma. And when the oxycodone doesn't work anymore, or you can't get them, what else are you going to do? Well, you're going to use the heroin next. And then when that doesn't work anymore, you're going to use the fentanyl because it's 100 times stronger than heroin. And when you're playing around with 100 times stronger than heroin, guess what? You may well overdose. And again, these people are not like the scum of the earth. These were like people who had a bad back and went. There's so many stories. It's a horrifying story. Yeah, you went to the pain clinic for a bad back, and 5 years later, you're dead of a fentanyl, overdose. And behind every one of those is just a broken family.
Oh, completely. But that's something that's generally overlooked, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
you just want to paint it as a single isolated issue in a small, very small issue that we can deal with easily. Just lock them all up and that's it. And through drugs, lock them up or arrest them. As you said, arrest your way out of it. You're not arresting your way out of this.
It's been interesting. There's actually been a number of senior ex-coppers. I think the previous AFP commissioner even said, we cannot arrest our way out of this drug situation. But it's not politically expedient to talk of such things, which brings us back to party politics in Australia and the fact that people aren't free to kind of express their views within the party political system. So, what's the first step? I don't know. I think the first step is to do what we're doing here and talk about it, and hopefully we can get just some people to have a discussion. People need to sit down and talk to their kids about drugs and have as open and honest discussion about it as possible, and come from the perspective that the world has changed. Just say no. Nancy Reagan, it didn't really work too well for her, to be honest. Yeah, so that is not the answer. Just don't use drugs. That would be great. If there was no drug use in the world, wouldn't that be fantastic? But human beings have always used drugs. We have to remember that things like magic mushrooms have been used 2,000 or 3,000 years recorded, and probably a lot more than that. DMT is the same. Cannabis has been used for thousands of years. So human beings have always found a way to use drugs to alter their consciousness, and that isn't going to stop.
Yeah. Ayahuasca is another one. People just don't understand. It's not as simple as it's not as simple as what people have made it out to be. Yes, there are newer drugs now, and some of them were created in the 1900s, but a lot of them are not. And the ones that you mentioned, ayahuasca, these are ancient. These have been used for many, many years.
Yeah.
So
I'd love to do an ayahuasca ceremony one day.
There you go.
It'd be amazing. Yeah. I mean, interesting. Before we finish up, interesting study. It came out of America, and they dealt with I think it was over 200 violent criminals. So violent criminals in prison committed violent offences, and they basically gave them in a controlled environment psilocybin, so magic mushrooms, and they then followed them in the years after they were released from prison, and not a single one of them ever got convicted of a violent offence ever again. So there's now starting to be lots of research into the I guess you call it the clinical use of these terrible drugs, and maybe that's something good and something bad, because I've read stories of like PTSD being treated by microdosing of MDMA and things like that. So there are not only do we have a good discussion about decriminalizing drugs, but maybe trying to use some of their power for good as well. Pop and meth.
I completely agree with you, and I think it's just as you said, it's very interesting how slow the snail's pace that we're actually traveling at.
Yeah.
We need to look at this a lot quicker and a lot faster. We need to be more efficient with this, because the longer we leave it, you're pushing the issue down the road. You're potentially creating a lot more of an issue to deal with in 20, 30, 40 years' time. So the sooner we get to it, the better it is for our future generations and even us now.
It is. And unfortunately, the law just takes such a long time to change. It's always discussed that, to change any kind of law is just a long process. I remember back in about 2014, we had the kind of first sort of lot of like synthetic cannabis which was coming into Australia. And back then, because there were so many different chemical formations of it, they'd make one illegal, and then the next week they just change the formula and for one that wasn't illegal. So, and by the time the law caught up, they actually changed the statute, they've moved on to another one. So, the law, unfortunately, doesn't work very quickly in these situations. But it's cultural change, I think, that has to actually come first. And societal change will drive the change of the law. If we're waiting for the law to drive kind of culture and society, I don't know if that's ever going to happen, to be honest. What do you think?
Hey, look, it's not common. Judicial activism works sometimes, but it's usually the other way around. Society changes, law changes. Law, very rarely, it does happen, but in an area like this especially, it won't. You'll need to see society change and then go the other way. I completely agree. And waiting for the law to change is just, I think it's a bit asinine, to be honest. It's just not gonna, it's problematic, and really you could be waiting a very, very, very long time. We need to drive that change as people.
Yeah, indeed. So in closing, really, I guess, hopefully you enjoy listening to us and watching us. All I want you to do really is ever think about this is we've got to start thinking about things at a deeper level in Australia and the world in general. Life is not the Kardashians and the latest crap on TV. There are real, proper, serious things that we need to kind of think about and have conversations. So talk to your family, talk to your friends, leave a comment if you disagree or whatever. And we thank you for listening. Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it. Thanks for your time, Dave. And we'll catch everyone next time.